Hello, and welcome to Mini Lecture H, Identifying the Solution. In Week 2, we introduced the four major steps in creative problem solving. Identify the problem, brainstorm, identify the solution, and make it happen. In Weeks 2 and 3, we looked at the first two steps. Next week, we will look at Step 4, which, obviously enough, leaves Step 3 for this week. Identifying the solution. We will develop this subject in 4 steps. First, we must select the best ideas from among the many ideas that suggested themselves during our brainstorming session. Next, we will apply an analysis technique known as the CARTS system. You got it. CARTS is yet another acronym in our ever-increasing string of acronyms in this class. It's almost like being in the military or working for the government. The CARTS analysis will open the way for drawing a map from the current situation to the solution. With a map in hand, it would seem that the next step would be to get to it, move on to our topic for next week, make it happen. But that would be premature. When you plan a vacation, you need much more than a map showing you how to get from your house to the vacation site. There are many other plans to be made. Our map needs a plan, and that, as you might guess, is going to require some planning. Now, throughout these CPS videos, we've been tracing the roles played by divergent and convergent thinking. Last week, with brainstorming, we saw that the major role was played by divergent thinking, with convergent thinking supplying some support, especially during the cleaning up phase. This week, the roles are reversed. Divergent thinking will play a role, but it is a small one and does not surface at every step. On the other hand, identifying the solution is convergent thinking's place to shine. Analytical skills come to the fore in every step of this third stage, as we will see. So, the first step, select your best ideas. The brainstorming session we discussed last week, with its concluding cleanup section, has left you with a collection of ideas for a solution to the problem. And despite your best efforts at drawing connections, regrouping, reducing, rethinking, and revising, you're most likely still going to need to do further convergent thinking to reduce and shore up your list. This process should be driven by 2 central issues. In the first place, review just exactly how you defined the problem you were facing in the first place. Review the what, why, who, how questions covered in Mini Lecture D in Week 3. Make sure the ideas on the table are staying focused on exactly what the problem is. When people start throwing out ideas and allowing their minds to wander over those ideas, as in a good brainstorming session, it's very easy to allow your focus to be shifted to tangential issues. And it doesn't take more than 2 or 3 tangents to take you down an entirely different road from the one you started on. If an idea is clearly trying to solve some problem other than the one you're trying to solve, then it should be discarded. Likewise, you should review the vision statement you wrote, which was inspired by your description of the problem and the Whibney question you devised. Remember Whibney, wouldn't it be nice if? Now again, this is all in Mini Lecture D if you need to review it. But if an idea clearly has nothing to do with fulfilling the vision statement that you wrote, then it too should be discarded. Now, one important point for this step is that you should not overthink it, and you especially should not overthink whether or not to eliminate an idea from the list. The number one rule at work here is, when in doubt, don't throw it out. If it's obvious when you review the idea that it has nothing to do with the problem or your vision statement, then you can ditch it. But if it's not clear to you that it's irrelevant, then keep it, at least through the CARTS phase coming up. It's better to keep something in even though it will later be discarded than it is to throw something out that could later prove to be very helpful. Mama Sennett says, it's better to have it and not need it than it is to need it and not have it. Well, as we just mentioned, selection of our best ideas paves the way naturally for the CARTS method to determine our best options. Now, just a heads up, by the way, in order to discuss these 5 elements of the CARTS method systematically, we will take them slightly out of order, but I don't think that should throw you off any. The C and the R stand for cost and resources. Do you have what it takes to implement the ideas you've come up with? Do you have the budget? Do you have the personnel? Do your personnel have the right skills? Can we get what we need but don't have? What costs and resources needs require special attention and planning? No matter how good an idea sounds, if you can't afford it or you don't have and can't get what you need, you'll only set yourself up for frustration by leaving it in. The A stands for acceptance. Now, this is not acceptance among everyone involved. This is just acceptance within your team. If there is any significant resistance to the idea within your team that simply cannot be resolved, the idea should be eliminated. Even if there's no clear reason for opposition, even if the only thing the resistor can say is, I don't know exactly what it is, but I just can't agree with this. I can't get behind it. Any unresolved conflict or resistance within the group will create unnecessary and counterproductive friction that you certainly don't need. In essence, every member of the group has veto power over any idea. Of course, your team should try to find a way to resolve such conflict, but again, this should not be overthought. If resolution seems like it will take a lot of time and may not work anyway, then toss the idea and go on. Of course, your team should try to find a way to resolve. Okay, I'll go on now. Of course, as we've noted several times already, problem solving is not just a group or team activity. If you are soloing in this CPS procedure, you should be careful to listen to your instinct or inner voice telling you that there's something wrong with an idea. In fact, this might be even more important in a solo gig because you're the only one who can carry on the project. If you have doubts about what you're doing, you will be drained of motivation, efficiency, and productivity potential. It's not worth it to hold on to a single idea. Let it go and go on. T and S, finishing up our CARTS, are time and space. All the resources in the world don't do you any good if you don't have the time or the room to make it work. Do any parts of your list make logistical demands that create significant problems or challenges that must be addressed? Now, a satisfactory CARTS analysis of your narrowed list gets you ready to draw your map from the present situation to the solution to your problem. 3 steps can help you get your map drawn. First, you must put the ideas on your post-CARTS list of ideas into some kind of order. How can they work together sequentially and chronologically? After all, a map doesn't simply get you from point A to point B. It gets you from point A to point B by first going from point A to point A1 and then going from point A1 to point A2 and so forth until finally the next and last step is point B, your destination. The ideas on your list need to be ordered into point A1, point A2, etc. Which idea must be done first, which second, and so on? Are there certain ideas that require others to be done first? Are certain ideas clearly beginning steps and others clearly bringing it home steps? Fill in your roadmap so that all the turns reflected in your remaining ideas are made clear. Now it's at this point that you're ready to clearly define exactly what the solution is that you're working toward. When you get to where your ideas are taking you, what's it going to look like? This is where identifying the solution really comes in. Now, all along the way, there have been times when you have reflected back on exactly what the problem is and what situation you're trying to bring about. If you've done well so far, then the identified solution here should look a whole lot like your vision statement. But if there are important differences, then some tweaking needs to take place somewhere. So your final step of this stage is to review and revise your map. Is it getting you exactly where you want to go? If not, what are you going to do about it? The obvious thing to do is to tweak the map. Make revisions in this turn here and that turn there so that the map leads to the right solution, and this will often be what you need to do. But suppose the current solution is actually preferable to the one you first envisioned. This is not unusual. And it's important at this step to remember that nothing along the CPS process is written in stone and can never be changed. If the identified solution that you just came up with is actually preferable to the projected solution that you started with, then simply revise your WIBNY question and vision statement to accommodate the preferred solution you've discovered. This may sound like cheating, but who's being cheated? The whole idea here was to change a problem situation into a situation that is much better for everybody. When first considering the problem, you proposed a solution that seemed like just the right fix. But while exploring the possibilities more deeply, you discovered a better solution. You're not cheating yourself or anybody else by opting for that improved idea rather than the original. I mean, if you agreed with a car salesman to purchase a car for $15,000, but he later comes to you and says that he's found a way to let you have it for $14,000, are you going to say, no, I insist on paying the price we agreed on? Of course you're not going to say that. You've got a better deal. Now, as we mentioned in the beginning of this mini lecture, just having the map isn't enough to get us started. There's more to planning a trip than simply plotting a route on a map. We've got the map, now we need the full plan. The heart and soul of making a plan is action steps, clearly defined and measurable tasks that move you step by step toward your solution. The map you drew in the last stage is the template from which these action steps are derived. But up until now, the ideas in the roadmap are simply that, ideas. They must now be transformed into to-do statements, clearly defining an action to be taken. I can't stress this last point enough. It is absolutely vital that action steps should be written in explicit terms so that it is very clear exactly what is to be done and what it will look like when the step is finished. The number of action steps needed will depend, of course, on the particular problem and the particular solution. It may be as few as 5 or 6 or as many as a dozen or more. As is often the case in CPS, a balance must be struck between a list of action steps that is so short that it leaves important questions unanswered, and one that is so long that it deflates motivation because it looks insurmountable. A good rule of thumb for this is what I call the how do I get from here to there rule. If it isn't clear how one action step leads to the next, then another action step may be needed between them to answer this question. An action list is complete when it is clear how every step leads to the next on the list. As long as there are scratch your head gaps, the action list is incomplete. In fact, this is actually the second step in making a plan, which is to... In fact, this is actually the second step in making a plan, which is to fill in the gaps from the list that made up your map. As you convert those ideas into action steps, there will almost surely be how do I get from here to there questions that arise for which there is no clear answer. It is up to you to supply those answers in order to construct a usable list of action steps. So, while action steps and fill in the gaps are listed here as separate steps, they are actually done together, since the action steps list is not completed until all from here to there questions are answered. Once the action steps are completed, they must be assessed in terms of possible responses from people who are in a position to affect your efforts, either positively or negatively. The people we're referring to here are often called stakeholders. A stakeholder in a given process is any person whose life will be affected in some significant way by that process. In other words, they are people who hold a stake in the process. It's very important to identify any stakeholders in your emerging plans. Who are the people around you who will have to deal with, in one way or another, with the actions you implement and the changes you make? Whose lives will be changed in a noticeable way because of your endeavors? Stakeholders can usually be identified in groups. For example, depending on the nature of your problem and the nature of your project, stakeholder groups might include family members, neighbors, customers, co-workers, etc. Groups of stakeholders can further be characterized as either assisters or resistors. Assisters are stakeholders who are likely to be supportive of the project and may be able to help out in some way, either by actively participating in your action steps or by providing some form of assistance or encouragement. Resistors are stakeholders who are likely to oppose the project for some reason and who may create obstacles that could jeopardize the success of your plan. This is one of the places where divergent thinking goes to work in identifying the solution. You need to think creatively and carefully about who the stakeholders are and which ones might be assisters and which ones resistors. So don't overlook either your listing of stakeholder groups or your don't overthink either your listing of stakeholder groups or your anticipation of assistance or resistance from them. Brainstorm these ideas and make note of any suggestions with any plausibility at all. Don't question your ideas or stop to discuss them in detail. The idea here is to get all reasonable suggestions out in front of you. Weeding them out will come next. Now, it's important to note that while groups will typically represent either assisters or resistors, it's possible that one stakeholder group could be assisters in some way and resistors in others. It's also important to note that some stakeholder groups may be neither assisters nor resistors. However, given that by definition, stakeholders are going to be significantly affected by your actions, it is quite common for them to respond with either assisting or resisting attitudes and actions. Now, once you have your list of potential assisters and resistors, you should narrow it down. Once you have your list of potential assisters and resistors, you should narrow it down to a list of key assisters and key resistors. Here it is important to think carefully about each of the suggestions made in your stakeholder brainstorming session. There are two key questions to ask in your efforts to identify key assisters and key resistors. First, how likely is it that this assister or resistor scenario could actually take place? How likely is it that the assistance or the resistance that you anticipate will actually happen? Is it just slightly possible? Is it sort of 50-50, a toss-up whether it'll happen or not? Is it likely? Is it very likely? Is it almost certain? And second, how significantly would this scenario affect the project if it did arise? So suppose the assistance or the resistance did come in, how significantly will that affect your project? If a particular group of assisters decides to help out in the way that they can, will that be just a big boon, or will it be, just a little nice addition, or a group that could resist in some way, put up roadblocks for you? How likely is it that they will do that? And if they do it, will it be just like, will it bring your work to a halt, or will it just be a little bump in the road along the way? So how likely is it to occur, and how significant will it be if it does occur? Your action steps should be revised in order to take account of any resistors or assistors that rank high in both likelihood and significance. So if a certain potential is highly likely and highly significant, and would be highly significant if it did happen, then you need to have an action step that will help you prepare for that. For likely and significant assistors, you need at least one action step seeking their assistance and enlisting that assistance in places where they can really help. Find a place where assistors who are very likely to help you out will be able to help you out. Now, for likely and significant resistors, you need at least one action step identifying how you will either avoid the resistance before it can arise or deal with it when it does. So, our trip around the diamond is complete. We started out at first base, reducing our brainstorming list down to the best ideas. These are the ideas that were submitted to the CARTS analysis at second base. From the surviving ideas there, we were able to draw a map at third base, and from there we could see home plate where we made our plan. This is how we succeed in identifying the solution to our problem. And now all that leaves is making the plan happen, which just happens to be the subject of next week's CPS video. I'll see you then.